Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar today is entitled Addressing Homelessness and Poverty in the Schools. Our presenters for today's webinar are Christine Nadolski and Karen Rice. Both ladies are the Department of Public Instruction state coordinators for the education of homelessness children and youth programs. Christine has worked at the DPI for 8 years, and Karen has worked for the DPI for 3 years. It is my great pleasure today to introduce to you Christine and Karen. Ladies.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon. This is Karen Rice, and as Bonnie said, I am one of the state coordinators for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program at the Department of Public Instruction.
And this is Christine Nadolski. I am the other state coordinator.
So today we are going to talk about supporting students experiencing homelessness. And we do want to just start out by saying that we work with supporting school districts, public school districts around the state regarding their homeless education programs. So that is what we are going to be focusing on today.
So I wanted to start off with sharing some data with all of you around what homelessness looks like in our public schools and in our state. The most recent publicly available data that we have is from the 2017-18 school year. So when we talk about our data, we're talking about school year data, not calendar year. And so in that year, we identified 18,854 students cumulatively that were identified as experiencing homelessness throughout that school year. When we look at our numbers, we look at total numbers for the entire school year as opposed to kind of like a point in time count. That's what we are required to report to the U.S. Department of Education is the total number, and also really paints a picture of homelessness throughout the whole year. We know that, or as you can see too through the graph, that homelessness has been increasing in our state over the last 10 years in particular. And our homeless student population has been over 2% of the total student population in the last few years. Another measure that we look at data-wise is the nighttime residence of these students that are identified. And what the data points that we collect on and that school districts collect and are supposed to report on for every student that is identified as experiencing homelessness is whether they're living in a shelter, and that would include homeless shelters, any sort of transitional living program through a shelter system, a formal shelter system. And then we also look at unsheltered, and that would be living in a car, a park, camping, just not having a roof over their head. Hotel, motel, and that would be families living in a hotel or motel because they don't have anywhere else to go, and then doubled up. And we'll talk more about doubled up, but it's the sharing of housing with others. And that is the highest amount of students that we see. So about 75% of our students that are identified as experiencing homelessness are in a doubled up situation. And that mirrors national data, that 75% of students are doubled up. The other number that we look at is unaccompanied homeless youth. And we'll talk more about what that really means as an unaccompanied homeless youth, but these are students that are not in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. And so a lot of times it may be if a student, an older student staying with friends, so maybe if they're in high school and they're kind of couch surfing between friends' houses or like a family friend or something like that. And then we also see high incidence of unaccompanied homeless youth for very young children. And though for those cases, it would probably be a student that is staying with a relative, maybe a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, but not through a formal system. They're not formally placed through out-of-home care or anything like that. It's just an arrangement. for a specific reason. So, and again, we have a high number of unaccompanied youth in high school grades, but we do see a significant amount in young children as well. We wanted to touch a little bit on the impact of homelessness on children and youth, because we do see that there are higher incidences of acute and chronic illness or depression and anxiety around or for students that experience homelessness. And really, it's homelessness at any time in early childhood is associated with poor classroom engagement and poor social skills in elementary school. And that's at any time. So that was not only looking at students that are currently experiencing homelessness, but a student that did experience homelessness but then became permanently housed again, still is associated with poor classroom engagement and lower achievement. The achievement gap between homeless and low-income elementary students persists over time. So when we examine our test score data at DPI, there is a difference between students that are what we call economically disadvantaged, which would be low-income students, compared to students experiencing homelessness. And students experiencing homelessness perform much lower than low-income students. So we know that homelessness is a big factor in students' education. And the youth who experience homelessness are 87% more likely to drop out of school than other youth. So just a little bit of history. Karen and I work at DPI, and what we mainly do is help school districts fulfill the requirements that they have under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And so this is a federal law that was originally passed in 1987. It was more recently reauthorized in 2015 under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And there were some changes that were made at that time, but the intent of the law stayed the same with that reauthorization. And the McKinney-Vento Act really works hand in hand with the Individuals Disability Act, Title I, other federal education programs. And we just work hand in hand with those programs and try to create a lot of collaboration as we're working through all the federal requirements for school districts.
So as Christine mentioned, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act provides the requirements for what school districts are expected to do to support students experiencing homelessness. The main themes of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act include identification of students experiencing homelessness, school stability, and that really focuses on ensuring that students have a stable educational environment, even when their home life may not be currently in a stable situation. It focuses on school enrollment, making sure students are enrolled in attending school, and providing support for academic success. Another important piece of that is child-centered best interest decision making, and that really focuses on making sure that any decision that's made about school and attendance and things like that is done with the child in mind and at the front of that decision. And in general, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, it tries to ensures that students experiencing homelessness have access to the same public education and related services as their permanently housed peers. So we know that people may be aware that there are different definitions of homelessness. So we wanted to make sure that we talked about what homelessness means in the context of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act and the requirements that public school districts have. So the term homeless children and youth means children who lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And again, this applies just to the school definition of what homelessness is. We know that other federal programs have differing definitions of that. But we wanted to just kind of talk briefly about what that means to help you all have a better understanding of what this really looks like. So fixed, regular, and adequate. A fixed situation is stationary, permanent, not subject to change. Regular is relatively permanent. It's used on a routine, consistent basis. And adequate is really sufficient for meeting the psychological and physical needs of the student in their home environment. So a space that would not be adequate would be, for example, a student sleeping on the couch in the middle of the living room where there's people coming and going, or it might include a student sleeping on a concrete floor in somebody's basement, that we would consider those not adequate living situations, just as examples. So we're really looking at, when we talk about, is the student experiencing homelessness, can that student go to the same place every night and sleep in a safe and sufficient space? So just to talk a little bit more about IDEA and McKinney-Vento, again, IDEA is the federal laws around students with disabilities. Provisions under McKinney-Vento and IDEA are compatible. So they do work hand in hand. One does not supersede the other. And students with disabilities who are homeless do have the same rights under McKinney-Vento as their non-disabled peers. There are additional requirements under IDEA regarding identification, evaluation, programming, and placement, however. So regarding eligibility, Christine mentioned a little bit about how we really look at nighttime residence of students, but a student would be eligible under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act or identified as experiencing homelessness if they are sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reasons. So again, this is referred to as doubled up. And as Christine mentioned, approximately 75% of the students in our state do fall in this category of doubled up. Students would be eligible for services under McKinney-Vento if they are living in hotels, motels, camping grounds due to lack of alternative accommodations. Again, living in shelters, whether it's emergency shelters, transitional shelters, this could also include domestic violence shelters, and living in a public or private place that's not actually designed for sleeping for humans. So this again would be cars, parks, abandoned buildings, things like that. Children from migratory families are also eligible if they meet the McKinney-Vento requirements. So again, if they lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And then unaccompanied homeless youth, which Christine mentioned as well when we were talking about data. So a student who meets the definition of homeless and is also not under the care of a parent or legal guardian.
And I did mention this definition already, but just so you have it, an unaccompanied homeless youth is a youth who they first meet the definition of experiencing homelessness under one of the situations that Karen just mentioned, and that they are not in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. And so like I kind of gave those examples already of if there's a young student living with a relative, but it's not a formal placement and it's on an emergency basis, they would be identified. Youth, the older youth living with friends, or they may have run away, may have been kicked out. One thing we did want to mention is that kind of nationally we know that many youth run away or are kicked out because they're fleeing abuse, family dysfunction they're fleeing, and that a third of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ as compared to 3 to 5% of the overall population and are getting kicked out. 10% of homeless female teens are pregnant. And so there are a lot of factors that come into play of why a youth isn't living at home. And for McKinney-Vento, we're really just looking at their current living situation. So each school district in the state is responsible to continue a student's education in their school of origin for the duration of homelessness or until the end of an academic year if the student finds permanent housing, or immediately enroll a student that's experiencing homelessness in their resident school district. And so we wanted to mention this because it's a really important right that students have. So the school of origin means the school that the child or youth attended when they were last permanently housed, or the school the student was last enrolled and attending. And really, this really comes into play when students are attending a school. Something happens that they lose housing, they may move to a different school district, and they still have rights to go back to the school they had previously been attending. And that's their right under So some things: when a student with a disability who is homeless relocates, the new resident school district must either continue the student's education still, again, following McKinney-Vento in that school of origin, or enroll the student in the attendance area where other permanently housed students attend. A student's disability may be a determining factor regarding school of origin decisions, but a school district can't deny enrollment solely based on the student's disability. So when Karen was talking about best interest decision-making practices earlier under McKinney-Vento, really we presume that keeping a student in their school of origin is in their best interest. And it's important to keep that school stability for students experiencing homelessness. Now, if there would be a factor of a student's disability preventing that from happening, or making it not feasible for the student, or not in the best interest of the student to do that, that determination can be made, and then the resident district would need to immediately enroll that student. So in general, the school district where the student is currently living is responsible for implementing the IEP and ensuring that FAPE is happening for that student. But when we're looking at students experiencing homelessness, again, we need to presume that keeping the student in their school of origin is in their best interest. So, so when a student is experiencing homelessness and has an IEP, the two districts need to agree on the district that will be responsible for that student and be responsible for providing FAPE. DPI just said that the two districts need to agree on who's responsible.
Okay, so when talking about school enrollment, again, as Christine mentioned, it is presumed that keeping a student in their school of origin is in their best interest. But as she mentioned, when that is not the case, or the parent, guardian, or youth requests, students have rights to immediately enroll in their resident district. And it's important to know that if a student does choose to enroll in the resident district, they do have the right to enroll immediately and are not required to have documentation that other students would have to have upon enrollment. So that could include immunizations, health records, proof of residency, any sort of legal guardianship documents, things like that. It is the responsibility of the school district to try to help to obtain those documents, but they are not needed at the time of enrollment. And students who have missed any application or enrollment deadlines during a period of homelessness have a right to have access to those. So that doesn't mean that there would need to be additional classes added or things like that, but if there's a waiting list, a student that is experiencing homelessness would need to be moved to the top of that waiting list.
So there are provisions for enrollment in district administered preschool programs under McKinney-Vento. So preschools are included in the school of origin definition so that students experiencing homelessness have the right to continue attending those preschool programs if they are administered through the school district. So we know there are a lot of school districts in Wisconsin that work with, provide 4-year-old kindergarten or 3-year-old kindergarten services in community sites. And so all of those community sites, if the student is enrolled in the school district, would be included under McKinney-Vento. So homeless liaisons across the state must ensure access to Head Start or early intervention under IDA Part C and other preschool programs that are administered by the school district as well. So we encourage all homeless liaisons across the state to ask about young children that may be in the household, even if they're not school age, to really be connected with some of those services as well.
So we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about transportation because this is an important piece of McKinney-Vento. As part of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, students do have the right to transportation to and from the school of origin, including until the end of the year if the student becomes permanently housed. So what that means is if a student is identified as experiencing homelessness in September, and they continue in their school of origin, the districts are required to provide transportation. If the student finds housing in November and it is in another district, that student does have the right to continue in their school of origin with transportation through the remainder of the academic year, regardless of the fact that it's in another district. So that is really important to know, and transportation is a really big piece of the law. And school districts must provide students in homeless situations with transportation services that are comparable to other students. However, it is important to know that the district is obligated to eliminate barriers to participating in school, to attending school, and transportation is usually that biggest barrier. So this does include participation in extracurricular activities. If a student experiencing homelessness does want to participate in an extracurricular activity, again, the district must remove barriers to help that student to do that by providing transportation, among other things. It's just so that the information is made public. This is very well known with districts, but just so that you all are aware, districts are obligated to share those transportation costs. And so it is really important that districts are working together when it comes to providing transportation to students. So a little bit about transportation and IEP services, because this is a question that we receive a lot. A student would receive comparable transportation under McKinney-Vento as long as transportation is not written into the IEP as a related service. So obviously, if it's in the IEP as a related service, that remains under IDEA. But if that's not in the IEP, then it is covered under McKinney-Vento. And school districts cannot add transportation into IEPs just to cover transportation under McKinney-Vento. So again, that's all based around the student's disability and what those needs are. We also wanted to share about dispute resolution, because this is something that that we hear a lot about as well, and it's important to know that this is a right of students experiencing homelessness. So it is possible that disputes will arise over eligibility, school selection, or enrollment in a school. And so the key to this is when that happens, the student must immediately be enrolled in the school in which enrollment is sought while the dispute is going through the process, including all the appeals that the family or the student would have the right to. So the districts are required to have policies and procedures around what their dispute resolution process looks like. And part of that includes the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth must be provided of a written explanation with any decisions made by the school and what that process is to appeal those decisions. And the district's homeless liaison helps to carry out that process through all of the levels until it is resolved. So just kind of an example of what this might look like is if a student would come to enroll in school and parents would share that they are experiencing homelessness and would talk about their living situation, and the district homeless liaison would decide for some reason that they don't believe that the family is eligible under McKinney-Vento, the student must be enrolled, and the district would then go through their dispute process over eligibility for McKinney-Vento services. So we do know that there are often disagreements about school of origin for students with disabilities. And again, as I think that Christy mentioned before, a student's disability may be a factor in determining if the student remains in the school of origin. So if after that happens and the school district follows their usual process for addressing the requirements, if the decision is made that remaining in the school of origin is not in the student's best interest, the parent, guardian, or youth must be informed of the decision, and the student transfers unless the parent appeals that decision.
So just kind of moving forward with the disagreements, if the parent believes the student's special education needs can't be met in the selected school, then an IEP team meeting should be held to review the IEP and determine placement. And then if the parent disagrees with the IEP team placement decision, the parent would need to follow the dispute resolution options available under IDEA, because at that point it would be the IEP determination and not related to the McKinney-Vento Act anymore. We also wanted to touch on how McKinney-Vento kind of works hand in hand with other programs and other federal requirements. So all students eligible under McKinney-Vento are automatically eligible for free school meals. And this is actually through the U.S. Department of Agriculture policy and not actually through McKinney-Vento. But students experiencing homelessness are categorically eligible for free school meals. So it's as simple as parents don't have to fill out the free and reduced lunch application. The homeless liaison who identified the student can simply send an email to the food service director in the school district. And we have some resources linked here just with information around that because it is a pretty seamless process and most districts are able to do this very quickly for students that are identified.
And free school meals would begin at the time that the homeless liaison notifies the food service people in the district. So that is a process that, like Christine said, begins quickly, and there is not a lag time to process an application or anything, that it is immediate.
We did mention that school districts must coordinate McKinney-Vento and special education services within their district and other districts involved. Already. And then one really important piece is that information about a student that's identified as homeless, their living situation is protected under FERPA. And FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So that living situation is considered a student education record and cannot be disclosed to outside individuals outside of the school district. So a district could not contact a landlord to check in on a living situation. They could not disclose that living situation to any other agency without permission from the parent.
So as I mentioned earlier, every public school district in the US is required to have someone designated as the homeless liaison in the district. And we wanted to just provide an overview of what the homeless liaison's role actually looks like in the school district. And the person who is designated as the liaison is up to the school district. So the district can decide who the best person is to be in that role. In addition to that, the person who is the designated homeless liaison is also often not the person doing the work of the liaison. For example, we know in our state that many of our smaller school districts have district administrators who wear the hat of homeless liaison and have that official role, but it is often counselors or social workers who are meeting with families and things like that. So the role of the homeless liaison in districts is kind of fourfold. First, to assist unaccompanied youth and or parents or guardians with placement, enrollment, and knowing their rights. The liaisons are required to disseminate public notices of educational rights in the community, and they are responsible to inform and assist with accessing transportation and resolve enrollment disputes, mediate and resolve enrollment disputes. So again, every public school district must designate a homeless liaison to carry out those duties. And those duties include ensuring that children and youth in homeless situations are identified, enrolled in, and have full opportunity to succeed in school. That includes receiving educational services such as preschool, and it does include making referrals to outside providers such as with healthcare, dental care, and mental health services. In addition, the homeless liaison is responsible to inform parents and guardians or unaccompanied homeless youth of their rights and to help them participate in their child's education. And so we included in this PowerPoint a link to the homeless liaison directory that is on our website. And this would be important if you would be looking to connect with the person that is designated as the homeless liaison in a district. We do have all of the public school districts and the contact information of who their homeless liaison is on our website at that link. So I mentioned that part of the role of the homeless liaison is to disseminate public notice of educational rights. This often includes homeless liaisons posting rights of students as well as the homeless liaison's contact information around the community in places where we know that families would visit. So in every community that looks different, it could mean that the homeless liaison would post that public notice in a public library, in a laundromat, in a grocery store, in a gas station. It depends on the community and where it is that families would see that. And that's really to help families to know that they do have rights if they become, if they find themselves in a homeless situation, so that their child can maintain that educational stability. Again, we talked about mediating enrollment disputes, and informing of transportation services, and making sure that transportation is arranged to and from the school of origin. And then an important part of this is ensuring that district staff receive professional development around McKinney-Vento. So the homeless liaisons we know in districts are not always the only people interacting with students, that they really rely on the relationships that teachers and lunchroom staff and administrative assistants and anybody else who interacts with students, they rely on those relationships to identify students. You know, it is those people that often hear of a change in a living situation that then need to be referring those students to the homeless liaison. And so part of that that is the obligation of the homeless liaison to provide training to those people to know what to do if they're concerned about a student.
We did want to share too, so as a state, we do receive some funding for McKinney-Vento, and we are required to grant out those funds in a competitive grant process. So we wanted to just share with you the school districts in the consortium that receive the McKinney-Vento grant funds. Currently, we have two consortium, and those are our CSAs, they're cooperative educational service agencies, and so they work, both of the CSAs that we serve with grant funds work with multiple districts within their CSA around services to students experiencing homelessness. We did want to point out that services provided with these grant funds must be designed to expand or improve services for students experiencing homelessness that are above and beyond meeting all the parts that we just went over that all school districts have to adhere to. So we do have districts doing some really innovative things, which is why we also wanted to share which districts those were with you, and doing some really, really wonderful things to support their students experiencing homelessness.
So just to highlight a couple of those things, there are several of these funded districts that have staff that they've hired that they call graduation coaches. And those students really work to support their unaccompanied homeless youth to get them to graduation and to be thinking about their post-secondary plans, whatever that looks like. We do have districts that have mentoring programs for students experiencing homelessness, and that have people in their high school buildings that are providing services, academic services, tutoring and check-ins and things like that for students experiencing homelessness. And these really are districts that have committed to going above and beyond, like Christine said, and to do some innovative things to serve their students experiencing homelessness, including building connections with the community. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about these grant-funded districts.
And then we just have some resources. So we have our webpage at the top. We have tried really hard recently to make it really user-friendly and give really good guidance and have example forms and documentation for districts to be able to take in and make their own. And then 3 of our national partners, Schoolhouse Connection, the National Center for Homeless Education, and the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. The Schoolhouse Connection and the National Association at the bottom, they can do a lot more around also connecting with early childhood programming that aren't administered through a school district, and also with higher education. So they have a lot of resources around kind of those two populations that we at DPI don't focus on because there are connections, however, they're not working with public school districts directly. So if you're looking for kind of resources around those populations, both of those national partners have great resources around that.
I would also just highlight on our website that we have a number of training resources that are available for anyone to use. There is a McKinney-Vento sort of 101 basic module that's available, as well as a video. We also have a training module around unaccompanied homeless youth that specifically talks about that, and a number of webinar recordings from other things that we've done, including early childhood and transportation, and enrollment and identification. So we've tried to provide a lot of training resources, and anyone is free to use those and to share those as well. So those are on our website.
At this time, we can take any questions that you might have. We also have our contact information here. You can reach out to us at any time if you have questions later that come up. We're happy to help in any way.
So yeah, I do. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one says, does the homeless liaison or school social workers assist families in referrals to facilitate getting into permanent housing?
I would say yes, but that's often done kind of as a handoff to housing providers and case managers and things like that. So generally what that would look like is a homeless liaison or a social worker getting in touch with a housing program and working with the family to make that initial contact, and then kind of handing that family or the student off to work directly with the housing provider. So it is a referral, but it's not helping the family directly to find housing.
Okay, thank you. And then there's one as it relates to transportation of children with disabilities and the homeschool, as you talked about it. Oftentimes, students with disabilities and even some severe disabilities are sometimes denied placements at other school districts. Can you talk about how this is affected for a child who is homeless?
I think that's a little hard to answer without some of the context, but what we can say, we can speak to the McKinney-Vento aspect of it. And so if a student is attending a school already and then experiences homelessness, they have rights to continue attending that school. So in that case, I don't know where the denial of enrollment would occur necessarily for that student, because they would still have rights to continue in the school they were previously attending. I think I don't want to speak too much about the IDEA piece because we're not experts in that. And we have a lot of folks at DPI that can speak to that. So if there's more to that, if that person wants to ask more questions or give us a little bit more information, maybe we could help a little bit, but I'm not sure where else to go.
Okay, so I would like to encourage the person who asked that question to please contact either Christine or Karen to further discuss that. I do have another question for you. It says that you had discussed previously individuals' rights to contest placement and to go to like mediation. In special education, we have the Special Education Mediation Project in our state. When you're referring to mediation, how do people access mediation when it comes to the homelessness piece?
So the appeal process and the dispute process that we talked about under McKinney-Vento is all done through the homeless liaison in the school district. So if a decision is made by the school district, as I mentioned, they would need to provide that decision in writing to the parent, guardian, or youth, and include what their district dispute process is. So districts are required to have that process and to have a policy about that. And so the homeless liaison at that point would work with the parent, guardian, or youth to go through the process through the levels of appeal at the school district. So typically that might look like the homeless liaison, then a director of pupil services or a director of curriculum and instruction, and then the superintendent, depending on the size of the district. But there's different levels of appeal that the district is required to have, that the family can go through that process to appeal whatever decision was made by the district, but the homeless liaison is responsible to support the family or the youth through that process.
And then ultimately that could end up coming to the state level as an appeal. And I will say that again, that's for anything under McKinney-Vento related to enrollment, identification, and transportation under McKinney-Vento. And so if there would be pieces under about the student's IEP or anything related to special education, then, and not directly related to their homeless status, then that would have to follow the IDEA process.
And we do work very closely with someone at DPI who is on the special education team, who also has knowledge of McKinney-Vento. And so if there is a question with some overlap there, please reach out to us, and we are happy to work with that person to sort out if it is a McKinney-Vento or an IDEA concern.
Okay, I do have one other question, and that is, if a teacher or an employee of a school district comes to find out that a family has become homeless, where should be their first contact, and how do they access the information about who is the homeless liaison in the school, or where can they find some of these policies and procedures?
Sure. Well, districts are required to have a process in place of how students are identified. So if a teacher would have concerns about a student, or would hear from the student that they had to move suddenly, or were staying at a hotel or motel, something like that, the homeless liaison is responsible to communicate that process to the teacher, so that the teacher would know that the first step is to reach out to that homeless liaison. The teacher or other school staff is not responsible to ask questions, is not responsible to do anything around the identification. Their only responsibility is to reach out to the homeless liaison, who then would go through their process to make a determination. And we did link in our homeless liaison directory on our website that was in one of the slides. So that's a great way to find out for a school district who that person is. But our hope is that homeless liaisons are doing enough professional development in their district so that their name is known in the district of who they are, and that they're the person that should be contacted.
And some of our districts that have multiple school buildings or are geographically really vague have points of contact in each school building. So the homeless liaison may be the person at the district that is, finalizing all identification, but that there are points of contact in each school building. So it could be a school counselor, it could be a school social worker, any student services staff that might be working in that building, that might be a point of contact. And so those types of student services staff members may be another person for like a teacher or anyone else in the building that has a concern to reach out to.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Do either of you have some closing statement that you'd like to make?
Well, we just want to reiterate that anybody is welcome to contact us at any time with questions. We are more than happy to answer questions or to work with others at DPI to answer questions specific to IDEA and McKinney-Vento. We just want to thank you for this opportunity to share this information. And again, please feel free to reach out if we can provide any additional information.
Well, thank you both so very much. Karen and Christine, you've provided us with lots of information that I know that I didn't have before, and I'm sure those that are participating today were able to get a lot of great information from your presentation. So I'd like to thank you again. This concludes our webinar. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Please be reminded that Wisconsin Facets has over 80 scheduled trainings and webinars for the year 2020. Please check our website calendar and register for any of the upcoming trainings that you are interested in. And also please watch for the short evaluation coming your way after the live presentation today. Thank you again, Christine and Karen, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Bye-bye, everybody.